So I'm Amy Parks, and I'm here with my colleague, Melissa Grisalfi, to talk about our play project. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge our fabulous team of graduate assistants at Vanderbilt, and also Anita Wager, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. So we're talking about this playful learning project today, and I want to start with just a quick overview of what we're doing. The idea behind it is that we need to get young kids playing more in mathematics, and also that there are a lot of forces that are standing in the way of making that happen. So all of the pressures around curricula and standardized testing and pacing guides, the lack of planning time that elementary teachers have, increased academic demands over the last 2 decades. And so given all of these challenges, we thought, well, so we need this sort of intensive intervention to help teachers think about how to make mathematics more playful. And so that's what this project is. It's centered around professional development at a school in Nashville that over 4 years is hoping to build a playful culture. So what do we mean by mathematical play? And I'm going to take those 2 words and talk about them separately. So there's a rich scholarship around play that actually transcends human beings. There are play scholars that look at play across mammals and try to come up with a definition of play that explains what like baby cubs do as well as what baby humans do. And so scholars working around play would say play is something that is pleasurable. Beings do it for no reason other than that they want to. They would say play is something that involves choice. Play is like an approximation of later adult behavior. So when bear cubs are play fighting, they are learning to fight as adults. And when little kids are, play answering the phone, they're learning to have social relationships as adults. Play can be social, although it doesn't have to be. And it is initiated in the absence of stress, which I think is a really important criteria to keep in mind in school environments. So that's play. But we are particularly interested in mathematical play. And for our project, we take, I think, a slightly narrower definition than a lot of people who do math play work. So people like Herb Ginsberg, who have studied play in all kinds of settings, have said, like, I'm including any kind of play that allows kids to engage with a mathematical concept. So if they're building towers of blocks and it's like making the concept of height like possible to think about it, then I'm going to count it as mathematical play, which like is totally fine and I have no objection to it. But for our project, when we think about mathematical play, we're thinking about play that has been either the context or the materials have been designed by the teachers to intentionally lead children toward a specific mathematical learning goal. Because we're working in public schools, our focus is on how do different play contexts actually like achieve particular kinds of mathematics. Okay, so like, why are we doing this? A couple reasons. So like most broadly, and I'm going to talk about this for the least amount of time, but in some ways it's most important, because it is vital to the mental health of children. And I think many of us have become increasingly aware of that as both parents and educators over the last few years. Children need to be in spaces where they get to play. I often talk with my students about not just our roles as teachers, but like the responsibility we have as adults of a species toward the young of our species. And so our responsibility as adults is to create environments where 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds get to play during the day. If we're not doing that, we are violating that most fundamental responsibility. But like more practically, we want kids to play because we think that's actually where they are most likely to learn the kind of mathematics we want them to learn. So if we, I think most of us in this room probably think about learning as some kind of participation in a practice. And so the question then is, what kinds of practices are kids participating in school? And do we want them to participate in practices of like listening to adults and copying things down or memorizing steps? Or do we want them to engage in practices of posing problems for themselves, solving problems, negotiating with other people, approaching things in new ways, using materials creatively, all of those things. So play is this, what Melissa often calls an exploratory space that allows kids to engage with mathematics in exploratory ways. So it is not just like a touchy-feely early childhood, we should be doing play as a kind of like candy coating over mathematics. It is play contexts actually allow kids to engage more deeply in mathematics. And I guess the other thing I will say is there is also a history of work primarily in preschool about the ways that mathematical play benefits kids. So there's the Sigler and Romani work around playing board games to build number skills. There's a lot of work around early block building and what that does for spatial reasoning and geometric thinking all the way through elementary school. There's work on puzzle use. So we know all these specific things actually pay off in terms of mathematical content, but there is actually surprisingly little work once kids get to elementary school. Most of that research is preschool, but obviously 5, 6, and 7-year-olds can learn through play in the same way that 4-year-olds can, we think. Okay, so now I'm gonna set up the conversation by talking a little bit more deeply about our work. And the first thing I want to say is one aspect of this project that I find most exciting is the way we are linking the professional development we're doing with teachers to what is actually happening in classrooms with kids. So historically, lots of professional development work has sort of looked at, well, what are the interactions teachers have during professional development, or how has it shifted beliefs, or how has it shifted attitudes, or how has it shifted knowledge? But until we see how it shifts children's actual experiences in schools, like I'm actually not all that interested. So what NSF has allowed us to do is look really closely at the kind of PD we're doing and then show up in classrooms and videotape what teachers are doing, video record, what teachers are doing with kids to see if it's having an impact. So this is a longitudinal project. We started with kindergarten teachers at one school, and we did baseline observations to just sort of see like what is going on in their classrooms before we showed up. And then we did a week of PD in the summer that was really focused on big ideas. So what is play? What are the big mathematical ideas in kindergarten? What might activities look like? And then during the school year, we did 4 day-long professional development sessions where I fly down to Nashville and we spend a day unpacking a unit and then planning 4 days of mathematics instruction and trying to take the curriculum they have, which incidentally is terrible, and trying to make the lessons more playful. So the activities that the teachers use in the classroom are co-designed between our team and the teachers. I would say we are in a sort of 70% leadership role around those activities, but we really do try to encourage them to engage. And then this year we brought first grade online, so we're still working with the kindergarten teachers, but we followed our cohort of kindergarten kids up into first grade, and now we're working with that new cohort of first grade teachers, and then next year we will follow those kids up to second grade and work with those second grade teachers. So ideally by the end we will be able to see what kids who have experienced 3 years of mathematical play in classrooms are doing. Yeah, so this chart actually says the same thing of all the things I did. These are the dates of when we did all those things. Okay, so what have we learned so far? That we are like 2 years into the real work of this project. With teachers, we are finding that watching children play with mathematics was a productive perturbation for some teachers' prior ideas of how to best support student learning. So our teachers came in committed to, I mean, I don't know if they were committed, but enacting direct instruction ideas of how we teach kids things. We gather them together on the carpet, we tell them what they're supposed to do, we have them go practice it. And we had teachers express surprise that kids were actually learning during these play activities. We found, not surprisingly, that the PD that connected teachers' needs and leverages their expertise was well received. Our teachers have been so kind and supportive and engaged and said so many nice things about the work we do. And I don't think it's because we're particularly fabulous, but I think it's because we show up in their schools, we do the PD, we use their curriculum, we ask them what they think about things, and honestly, they're not used to being centered in that way during professional development. And then, I didn't mention this earlier, but we also run a video club. This is what Anita does once a month, where the teachers go back and they look at video of the play lessons and have conversations about what's going on. But this really helped to validate their sense that the children were actually learning in play, because of course, when you're running a classroom, you can't see everything that's happening. For our children, we learned that children think mathematically through play, not surprisingly, that integrating play into mathematics does no harm and in fact may benefit kids. We had this sort of hilarious meeting where we found out that the kindergarten test scores after our first year with them went way up. And of course, we were excited, but then we were like, but we don't care about test scores. We don't care about test scores. That's not important. We don't think like we were the cause of that jump, but what it has allowed us to do is to say to teachers, it obviously did not hurt that you introduced 30 minutes of free play into your classroom every day. It obviously did not hurt that you made your math lessons more playful. And that has given us some more freedom to work this year. We found that it transforms kids' classroom positioning, and some of our smaller presentations here have been about that, where kids who were previously seen as like not just not good math students, but not good students, were seen as having interesting ideas and engaging productively when the context shifted from having to sit quietly on the rug and raise your hand to actually being able to play with mathematical tools. And then play can transform the sophistication and visibility of children's mathematical reasoning. We saw children actually engaging in more complex mathematical problems during play than when they were doing traditional lessons. Okay, so what are we doing here today? We wanted to share some of our video, and as we were talking about like what we thought would be interesting, we thought like having different people's perspectives on the videos would be really great, because the thing about watching play videos is there is so much happening all the time. And we film with GoPros, so if you have not used those, you actually like use the little arrow and you can turn in 360 degrees to like watch what all the kids are doing, and they're all talking all the time and they're all moving all the time. And so you never see the same thing. And we're thinking about this special issue that, like, if you're old, you might remember, where it was designed around researchers looking at the same video and then analyzing it from their different lenses. And we thought, that's what we want to do here, and we want to bring in voices that maybe don't get heard all that often at PME&A, but are really relevant to our work. But before I bring in my voices, I'm going to have Melissa talk about our actual video that we're sharing with you.
Great job, Amy. Okay. So if you happen to look at that plenary paper that we submitted, it is 75% transcript. Because really the heart of what we're doing here today is actually inviting sort of a collective inquiry into into the question, what counts as mathematics? How do you know when you see it? And when you start to look at a video by looking for math only, what are you missing that's really important to our understanding of children's learning and really centering their humanity? So the video that I'm going to show you is a 4-minute clip of a longer video, and I want to situate it a little bit. So first of all, as Amy mentioned, the activities that we're working on with teachers are co-designed lessons that take their actual curriculum and hold constant the conceptual ideas that they're mandated to address, and either changes or entirely throws out the content of the actual lesson that they're using. So on the day from the video we're going to share with you today, this video takes place in November, and they're working on counting. And there are actually about 7 different standards that are tagged to this particular lesson, but the 2 that we were focusing on they were about counting, and in particular, making sure that children are learning how to count in order, that they're developing one-to-one correspondence, and that they're starting to notice this big idea that the last number you count actually represents the collection, the entire collection. And that they're really starting to be able to answer this question, how many? And how would I know how many? And that they start to see counting as the strategy that they'd use to answer that question. So the task that we designed with the teachers we call the zoo. And it is, this is a piece of chart paper that's on the table. And it's divided into 6 sections, and each section has a number on it, a number somewhere between 1 and 10 and 20, actually 2 and 20. And then they have this bucket of plastic animals. And the task is to make sure that you put the number of animals in the square that matches the number that's written on the square. As you can imagine, sometimes kids did that, and sometimes they didn't. But that was also part of the task. So while the task had this mathematical goal, a big part of what we talked about in our professional development with teachers was how important it was to give kids space to actually explore the materials, to negotiate with one another. We did want them all to count. We do care that kids know how to count, but it wasn't the only thing that we cared about them doing. And so it was okay, actually, that sometimes kids weren't counting. You'll actually get to see a little example of that in the clip I'm going to show you. So that's the activity they're working on. The clip you're going to see has 4 students in it, King, Quentin, Kiara, and Will. And the clip that you'll see, actually, the way the video unfolded, Patrick and Quentin and King are the ones who are right in the front. They're also the ones who are doing most of the talking, so you'll see most of them. But there are 4 kids in this group. So I'm going to play this video for you. It's 4 minutes. It is subtitled. And again, it's just the first 4 minutes. So if you're really curious about this, you can read the transcript in the paper. So now this is the moment of truth. Will the technology work?
Black boyhood play. And critical theories, including Black crit, Black male studies, and anti-Black spatial imaginary guide this particular conceptualization of Black play crit. And if you could look to my right, your left, you'll see the particular framing of Black play crit. And so let's start talking about Black crit. So Black crit prioritizes, of course, this notion of anti-Blackness, which is a social construction as defined by Michael Dumas and Kiana Ross, that as a social construction, as a lived experience of social suffering and resistance, and perhaps more importantly, what he calls an antagonism in which Black is a despised thing in and of itself. So anti-Blackness is this particular disdain and disgust for Black bodies, minds, and spirits, and even in this case, play as reflected in the laws and policies of the land, right? And also, Black play crit is informed by this notion of Black male studies. And Black male studies, it was introduced by Dr. Tommy Curry. It's a critical framework that challenges us to think differently about the historical and contemporary gender scholarship that oftentimes socially construct men of color, and particularly Black men, as violent, etc. So Black male studies aim to centralize this notion of anti-Black misandry, this particular disdain and disgust for Black men that is embedded, I should say, in institutions, right? So whereas describing Black men and boys as victimizers, Black masculinists or Black male studies scholars suggest that Black men and boys are victims of a larger social, political, and historical context. Right? And last and certainly not least, this notion of anti-Black spatial imaginary introduced by Dr. DeMarcus Jenkins, he argues that anywhere the Black body exists, it is seen as being out of place. And so there's this particular manifestation and consequences that is embedded in space. So he argues that space is and places are racialized and anti-Black, to be honest, right? So this notion of anti-Black spatial imaginary acknowledges this language of anti-Blackness and is circulated throughout discourses, images, and texts that tell a particular story about Black bodies as a problem, as non-human and placeless. So collectively, these theories formulate what I call Black Play Crit. And Black Play Crit contains or consists what I call developing ideas, and I call them developing ideas because it is my hope and desire that other scholars build on this conceptualization to continue to help us think about the ways in which the play experiences Black boys Black boys as victims. So the first developing idea is this notion of what I call play not, drawing on Dr. Curry's conceptualization of man not, where he says that, again, that Black men are racial and gendered victims of this institutional system. So this notion of play not has everything to do with the stereotypes and the biases that people in society have about Black boys. It is to help us think about the social construction of the Black boy body and how that leads to particular stereotypes and biases of Black boys. So when we think about the video, you saw in the beginning where both King and Quentin were engaging in childlike play, right? However, an uncritical teacher would look at those boys and consider their play styles and behaviors as problematic. In fact, I think one of the boys was considered a troublemaker, right? And so we have to think about how the stereotypes of the Black male body or the Black boy body is also mapped on to their play experiences. So if we have this thought of Black boys being troublemakers, we're going to see their play styles and behaviors as similarly problematic and producing trouble, right? So I want to caution the researchers to think about how the general play styles of Black boys can lead to the misreading of their mathematical play behavior. So before we even talk about mathematical play, we have to talk about the social construction of the Black boy body and what that means when they engage in play styles and behavior. And the second developing idea is called the play past, present, and future nexus. And this makes this particular developing idea makes a connection to the past and the present and the future. So in order to understand why Black boys are viewed in a particular way when they play, we have to think about what took place during enslavement. During slavery, Black children were oftentimes not offered opportunities to play, but when they did play, they were playing with white children for freedom, and they were learning English to take back to their parents, right? So in this case, while white children were playing freely, Black children, and particularly Black boys, were playing for freedom, right? So play was an act of freedom, right? And so when I think about the particular video that you just saw, I have to ask this question: how can mathematical play foster what we already know historically and contemporarily and futuristically about Black boyhood play, right? And I do think that we really need to have those conversations to ensure that we are curating space to value the cultural and gender ways of knowing and being of Black boys during mathematical play. And the third developing idea is this notion of place spatial exclusion. Oftentimes, because teachers have these deficit views and perspectives about black boys and subsequently the ways in which they play, black boys are oftentimes excluded from play and recreation. You may have known students in early child education who were invited to stand against the wall because they were engaging in problematic behavior, right? So this notion of play spatial exclusion has everything to do with excluding black boys from the play environment. And so when I think about the classroom that you just saw, I want to applaud the teacher who was a black female who I believe she curated a space to ensure that black boys were not excluded from the play environment. So I want to ask this question: what can we learn from a black teacher's ability to foster classroom spaces against black boys' exclusion from play, right? And last, and certainly not least, the last framing idea, or developing idea, I should say, is the public pedagogy of black boyhood play. And this particular developing idea has everything to do with celebrating black boyhood play. It acknowledges the hope, the joy, and the possibilities of black boyhood play. And when I looked at King and Quentin, I saw so many positive attributes: their ability to engage in mathematical reasoning, their ability to support each other during play. And I automatically thought about this notion of other brothering, drawing from the work of Dr. Marvin Lynn, who introduced the concept or term other fathering to acknowledge the ways in which black men teachers served as role models for children, black children in schools. I, along with a colleague, Dr. Jamel Miller, conceptualized this notion of other brothering to acknowledge the ways in which black men and boys support each other in this racist and classist system. And so when I think about King and Quentin, I automatically think about other brothering, the ways in which they supported each other's mathematical reasoning, the ways in which they supported each other's creativity, the ways in which they supported each other's mathematical brilliance. So I said all of this to say that I think that when we engage children in mathematical play, teachers or anyone who is working with or studying the experiences of black boys must confront their own biases and stereotypes and the anti-black misandry that oftentimes guide the way we see black boys and the ways in which they play. And I also suggest that teachers and researchers curate spaces in classroom to include, not exclude black boys from mathematical play as a way to foster that mathematical genius that black boys emanate, or that black boys display as they engage in mathematical play. Thank you so very much for your time.
Got to bring it down. I didn't realize how short I was. Oh yeah, so I have yeah, I'll try. No judgment if something falls or breaks as we try to work this out. Let's see. There we go. Yay! Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Naomi, and I guess I am our fellow insider today. And I get an opportunity to talk about this work, and I'm excited to talk about it from the lens of noticing. So that is an area and line of my research. And so what I thought about today in looking at the clip is to really think about how can we think about the ways that we think about noticing and what play can be done and to support that. So for me, I'm going to try to think about this idea of mathematical play through multiple noticing lenses, only because I have been reading so many of you who are in here who have done this work, and also others who aren't here. And so it was very hard for me to really pick one particular framework to view this work. So I'm going to try to pick three to share today. So of course, I have to definitely start with the work with my colleagues, Adi, who is here, and Nicole. We worked on the FAIR framework to help us really think about what does it mean to engage in anti-deficit noticing. And you did such a great job. I was like, she took my first part of explaining the framework, but thank you. But we really, we drew upon a social political perspective that was informed by critical race theory. And the hope was to really think about how we could counter dominant deficit discourses and also practices that were specific for marginalized groups of learners. So while we've seen a lot of people in the project use, throughout the conference use it, and in other papers use it for particular different populations, that was how we centered and started the work, particularly from a teacher of color. And so one of the things that I often do is, as I think about frameworks, they always push me to think about particular questions that are centered within those frameworks. And so for me, I started to think about, in relation to anti-deficit noticing, how can play support children being their full human beings that come with many human resources. And so some of the things I'm going to highlight that Nathaniel talked about, I'm going to also highlight those and how we think about it from an anti-deficit lens. Another question is, how can play support mathematics? In a way that learning, we see it as a creative exploration of ideas. And then this other way of, how do we think about interactions and interpersonal relationships as an integral part of learning? And so one of the things that really stood out for me is really, I want to highlight the interactions between Quentin and King when they were counting the 13. And one of the things that I love and appreciate was they were able to be their full authentic selves, and they had the freedom to count in ways that were authentic to them. So you could see on one end, Quentin was very excited. He was roaring. He was doing all the things, and he was excited. And King is like, yeah, let me just go ahead and count these right here. That's what I want to do. And yes, stop. Okay, yeah, I'm good. And so, but what I appreciate is that also thinking about that other brothering, like they respected each other in the way that they engaged and entered the space. And it did not bother anyone, not only Quentin and King, but also the other students who were at the table. It did not seem to bother them at all. So that was just a great way of thinking about this idea of freedom, to be able to engage in counting in ways that work for you. So you can bring your full authentic self into the classroom and be able to learn. One of the other things that came up was this idea of just how creative the boys were in thinking about counting. And so some of the things I appreciate is that they were, again, free to, so I'm going to line these up. I want to do a pair. Some were doing different things. And again, it fostered this idea that I can explore mathematics in ways that is creative, that is fun, and I can engage and have fun with that. And then also just want to highlight that relational interaction. So I mean, I'm an only child, so I don't know what it's like to be interacting with people. But I have children, and so like, and they're not the same. And so, but I appreciate when my children who are not the same, like respect one another's boundaries and know that that's just how you are. But they were still fostering and learning together. And so even in their counting, when they were counting together to get to 13, and Quinn's like, hold on, you're copying me. And King is probably like, no, I'm just counting with you, brother. What's happening? Like, we're just counting. And so, but again, it was like they were working together. And so I just posed the question, like, how can we think about play in a way that is disrupting some of the ways that we think about what does it mean to show up in math? How do we think about it from a creative perspective and the interactions that can be formed? And so another framework that I thought about is this idea of culture and power. So this draws heavily from the work of Vicki Hand, who I think she had to leave, but she also has a wonderful noticing paper that talks about positionality and power dynamics. And so one of the things in this paper it talks about is really trying to think about, so this paper focused on equitable mathematics instruction and how can we think about, in this paper, they talk about non-dominant students. How can they take up space in classrooms? And what types of noticing enable this to happen? And so I had questions. So how can we think about play that fosters dialogic spaces in classrooms? How does it blur this idea of what does it mean to engage in mathematics from a cultural perspective? And so this one is not clearly linked, but it's also within a paper, that how can we think about disrupting power dynamics between the teachers and students? And so one of the things that really drew my attention, and Tran and I, we were talking about it, we were like, what's going on with Will? So I don't know if many of you were noticing Will in the back corner. It was like, it was just really bothering me, like, what's happening? So I was looking at the video a couple of times, and so what I noticed is that in the beginning, like, Will was counting 7. He was, again, like, doing his own thing in a corner. He was counting his 7, and I'm looking, so I'm seeing, yes, you have 1-to-1, you're doing all these things. And then he kind of stops and pauses. He's transitioning, trying to figure out what to do next. And then the teacher comes back and pretty much kind of prompts him to do the same thing that he did again. And so he does this same thing over and over. And so I was thinking about Will, and then I'm looking at what's happening with Quentin and King, and they're just doing their thing. And it made me wonder about perceptions within Will with, like, what type of power dynamics exist between himself and the teacher, or himself and, like, do I have the power and agency to move on, to do something else? Because he went and did a repeated, he repeatedly counted something that he did. And so I do think, as we're thinking about, and you're looking at your videos, to think about what are the power dynamics that's happening, not also among the students, but among the teacher and the child, and also to even ask, Will, like, his agency, like, why did he do that? Because he had already completed that task. And so one of the things, of course, we're math people. So we think about children's mathematical thinking. And so, of course, as we think about children's mathematical thinking, we're thinking about those mathematical details. And mathematics is embedded through all of these. But this one's framework specifically looks at students' mathematical details. And so one of the things that I think about all of the 3 young men that I was able to hear is that all of them were engaging in this idea of a lot of the counting principles that we teach, or we want students to engage in early childhood mathematics. So we can see that they're utilizing this principle of 1-to-1 correspondence. And so that's when we see them, like, literally touching the animals, and they're counting 1, 2, 3. So we're able to see this mathematics that's happening. We also see this idea of order irrelevance. So that means, like, I can count. It doesn't have to be lined up in a straight line or any particular way. I can count these numbers, and the order doesn't matter. And so we can see specifically in Quentin, he was able to do that when he was counting, going zigzag in all different types of directions. And of course, all of the students were able to engage in this idea of cardinality. They knew how much they were able to count. And one of the things that I love that Quentin did is that it was King, as they were counting and Quentin kept going, Quentin was like, and we're done. So I appreciate, he was like, let me support my brother right here to let know that we're going to end. And so I just want to say I appreciated all of these, but I wanted to, like, really think about, as we're thinking about the mathematics that happen, and yes, I ended on all of the principles that we want kids to engage in, all of that couldn't happen if we didn't have an ecology or a system that supported that. So it's very important that as we are engaging with mathematical learning, that we think about the context, the structures, the systems, the ecology that is supporting what's happening. Thank you.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Tran Templeton. I am talking more about play because you don't want me to talk about math. That would not be good for anybody. I want to thank Amy, Melissa, and Anita for inviting Nathaniel, Naomi, and I into this dialogue about children's mathematical play. I admire what you all are doing to advocate for children's play in increasingly neoliberal educational systems that school children into assimilating and domesticating aspects of themselves that should be free. So I use domesticate purposely here, and later on in this response, I hope it'll become clear as to why. For anyone who might not buy into the idea that schools are oftentimes not actually spaces for children, I want to start with a short anecdote from a conversation I actually very recently had with a 3rd grader. So at the age of 8, Sky has already decided that she is done with school. Sky reported that her favorite subject in school is art, and that it is definitely not math. Apparently, math is a subject that she has never not liked. What if teachers did it right, I asked, not to suggest that they don't, but rather to glean how much she might understand the practice of learning and teaching math. Sky asserted, if teachers did it a fun way, then she might like it. Later, she tempered her indictment by remarking that, sometimes math is good when we're not just talking about our strategies, which is really boring. We're always just talking about our strategies on the board, and that takes forever. Skye's feelings about math, and by proxy school, foreshadow how many children, especially those from historically minoritized communities, eventually come to share this feeling of being done with school, even at the age of 8. So I share this anecdote to juxtapose it with the playfulness that we see in the video clip of Quentin, King, Kira, and Will. At the outset, it seems like there is not much to see. After all, by just watching and not listening, it would seem as though the children are, quote, on task. They all make contact with the animal manipulatives, albeit some with more alacrity than others. They all stay at the table. Sure, there's movement, especially as Quentin and later Kira move around the table, but he stays in the designated area. They stay in the designated area. However, when you really attend to what the children are saying and doing with the materials and with each other, you can witness how the children, especially Quentin, are turning the task into little games, which in other classrooms might get them called out for being, quote, off task. What's not noted, well, what wasn't noted before in the transcript was the initial 10-second, the phrase in the initial 10 seconds. I'm just gonna play it for you because it's worth hearing again. So that wasn't originally in the transcript, but that just got added. So after the children introduced themselves to the camera, Quentin by sticking out his tongue, making funny noises, King by looking very closely at the camera, and Kira by smiling demurely, Quentin then moves closer to the fourth child at the table and remarks to seemingly no one in particular, "I'm gonna fart." As a person who works with 0 to 5, I think a lot about farts and poops, so that's why I was so tuned into that. The other children at the table seem to ignore Quentin's plan. They're trying to complete the task at hand, but they eventually get taken in by Quentin's playfulness, and if you read the rest of the transcript, you'll be able to see this. They get taken in by his playfulness, his ability to improvise, to rework, and riff on the theme of the assignment. So my research is in listening to how young children, on their own terms, negotiate and make sense of their social lives, discourses, and institutions. Listening is broadly defined for me. It's in hearing what's audible, attending to silences, and noticing movements, gestures, and affects. That is, listening cannot only be about hearing what words may come out of children's mouths or determining the coherence of children's narratives. In fact, anyone who has ever known a young child knows that coherence is subjective, almost a matter of opinion. Further, children belong to multiple cultural worlds, and one of which is childhood culture, a culture reflected in their relationships with other children. And the irony of being an adult is that while we were once children, we are no longer part of childhood culture. So we oftentimes struggle to make sense of why a group of children might be giggling over a bodily noise or a made-up word. Children have their own logics, which elude the banal sensibilities of adults. Their ways of being and knowing generally exceed our capacities to be inventive, if not absurd. And I mean absurd in the most reverential way. To be absurd and to be able to improvise involves skills that young children start to hone in their earliest months. We see this, for example, in infants' responses to adult speech. Yet after many years of being schooled out of creativity, adults have to learn again how to live in the present, how to respond outside of predetermined discourses and narratives, and how to see things around us as more than what they are. So Rauschio and Winston emphasize children's openness. They define openness as relating to surroundings in creative rather than in a predefined way, viewing elements also in relation to ongoing interaction, rather than only as elements with fixed sociocultural meanings. We see Quentin's openness, his ability to transform the task into multiple things at once, while remaining permeable to his peers' ways of being, to becoming and doing otherwise. We see this in how he makes the lion manipulatives roar at each other. He holds them up as though to prepare for battle. Yet when King tells him to stop, he immediately picks up on that cue, and he suggests the zoo become a shoe store. Why a shoe store? We're never gonna know. Quentin might realize that he has to negotiate his desire to be playful with his desire to be with his peers. So he enthusiastically joins King in putting animals in the 13 pen. And when he excitedly notes that there are matching animals, Quentin decides that it's a game. Even if King and the other children don't know it yet. Soon, both children realize that there are too many animals. Quentin hasn't quite put together yet that pairs will never make 13, but what he may know is that his game didn't quite work with the objectives that King and the teacher have in mind. Quentin proposes to knock down the animals. He proposes to knock down the animals. I lost my spot. And joins King again in counting to 13, although they get tied up in each other's counting, and 13 actually becomes 15. I stopped the video and counted. In the interest of time, I'm abbreviating what I notice about Quentin's openness. He attends to the objectives of the task, persistent in wanting to help King with a 16 pen. He asks, for example, can I help you with 16? I'm trying to do 16. I want to help with 16. So he's persistent in asking to help his peers and also toggling between being a student who does what is asked of him and a child who wants to play a game of match with friends. At one point he says, I know what these are. They're twins. Who wants to play match the twin with me? Let's match the animals. We can also see how despite their best efforts to stay with the task, eventually King and Kira cannot help but start to play along at times. In fact, Kira too starts to move around the table, so this happens later. After Quentin assures the group that the teacher has said that they can. Her energy becomes more vibrant over the course of the 8 minutes, and I actually attribute that to Quentin's enthusiasm. At one point, she responds to Quentin's call for a matching partner, but then she distances herself, perhaps when it seems that it may, quote, get her in trouble. Nobody actually said that, that's my interpretation. Quentin then reassures her that they're not doing anything bad, that they're just taking care of the animals. So it's the zoo aspect of this video that actually intrigues me. I teach a course on non-human animal and child relations, and in it we observe the uneasy metaphors between animals and children, racialized, disabled, gendered. But we also consider the mutual oppression of animals by the hands of humans and of children, especially children who are considered undomesticated and unruly by the hands of human adults. That children in schools everywhere use representation of animals and enact human supremacy in their play is not lost on me. So it would be a wild overinterpretation to assert that by reworking the rules of the activity in several ways, Quentin is working to keep the animals from being penned up. Does he recognize the kinship that animals in zoos might have to children in schools? Does he perceive that just as children contained in school need care through play, animals in zoos need care as well? So I can't say for sure. However, I don't think it's unfair to say that Quentin is playing and inviting peers into mathematical play. Even though school norms typically sanction play for other moments in the day, and even when his version of math looks and sounds different because it is embedded within imaginative, fluid childhood worlds. Quentin's impulse is to play. And by all accounts, he does not think that play and work should be mutually exclusive. Without play and the opportunity to relate to our surroundings creatively, there is no joy and no real learning. So I want to end with this quote by play theorist Brian Sutton Smith. In an interview, he said, "Life is crap, and it's full of pain and suffering. And the only thing that makes it worth living, the only thing that makes it possible to get up in the morning and go on living is play." And I think Quentin might know this already.
All right, so first of all, it is a minor miracle that 5 people stayed within our exact time constraints. Well done, us. Because we wanted to make sure that we had time for some discussion and to hear from all of you. And in fact, we do. We have 15 minutes for that, so it's fabulous. So I invite your questions to the panel, your questions to Amy or me, or your own observations, may not fall off the stage, about what you saw in the video. And we probably don't have enough time to pass the mic around, but if you speak loudly, I'll restate your question so everyone can hear it. Yes, Adi.
As you think about the mental
should have had you be our discussant. So just for the people, I'm not going to be able to summarize all of that for the people in the back, but it was pretty loud. Let me take one of those questions maybe that's kind of general to all from what you were saying, which is, can we take this lens on play, which we were applying to children, and think about what happens when we ask those same questions about teachers? What are the impacts and the outcomes when teachers become the focus of our inquiry?
Okay, I can give a quick. Oh, do I have to? Can I say it? Okay. I could give a quick example or how I think. I've been thinking about play in relation to my teaching. So I teach a mathematics content course for elementary preparation teachers. And so one of the things that I have been doing is engaging in play. And in particular, we've been working with playing the game Yahtzee. And so the first time we played Yahtzee, it was really interesting. They were like, why are we doing this? Like, they didn't understand, like, this is a math content course, what is happening. And then, so we played it again, and they were like, yes. I mean, it was all the things, all the emotions, and it was great. And so I was talking to them about, again, like, these are the types of things that if we want to foster in our classrooms, that they also have to experience it as a learner or as a teacher. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Adi, but I do think that I've been thinking about how does play into my classroom, but I can tell you that it felt very uncomfortable for them, because for them, the way that they think about what it means to be a mathematics learner or to engage in mathematics, play is not a part of that. And so it took them a while to be like, oh, okay, I can do this. Like, no, it's fine. So that is just my own experience of trying to think about play from that. And so now it's fun, but I use Play-Doh. I do a lot of things in my class, and they don't understand what's happening. But then I tell them, like, trust the process. I have them for 2 semesters, so I was like, trust the process.
So I think that's a great question, and I think that we need to think structurally about how we create playful spaces for teachers. I love this example, but I will say I spend a lot of my time now going around and giving talks about joy and playfulness, and I am shocked by how quickly both researchers and administrators leap right to how can we make a checklist or protocol for observing play and or joy in classrooms, and it just makes me want to hit myself in the head with a microphone. Like, we are, and when I say we, I mean us too, creating spaces that make it really hard for teachers to be playful. And so I would like us to think every time we step into a classroom to observe what's going on, the ways in which our observations are likely to make teachers more or less playful.
So I don't know if this will answer your question, but I do a lot of play in my higher ed classroom because I teach early childhood, and it's really important for me to help teachers see that how children's play sends them somewhere else. Like, there's a time and space that we actually exit because we are so deeply in a flow. And so what I've done is have people go outside, and I give them little provocations as to how to play like children. And when we get back and I say, how much time do you think passed? They say 10 minutes, but actually we were out there for an hour, right? And so thinking about how we get into this flow and help. So for me, I guess the short answer is I really want teachers to reflect on what happens when we play. So I ask, what's something that you've learned really well? How did you learn it? Usually it's through some kind of play, right? Though they wouldn't call it play, but I'll take their responses and say, that's play, right? And here's how it is.
Thank you so much for the question. I've been sitting here for the past few minutes just thinking about the ways in which play could be considered a notion of healing for teachers who observe the play styles and behaviors of Black children. I think there is a duality there. I think it's not only healing, but also traumatizing or trauma as well, because if a teacher remembers his or her joyful play experiences, perhaps viewing a Black child engaging in these joyful experiences would produce joy But what if that teacher that observe a child who, is experiencing trauma during play? It perhaps invokes their own personal trauma that they may have experienced during play. So play is both joyful and traumatizing, and I think we have to acknowledge that duality, particularly for marginalized folks.
I'm going to tell you one quick thing about these teachers in this study. So first of all, the teacher you saw in this video, Miss Lane, was our most experienced teacher, and I would say our most skeptical teacher about whether play was really going to be a good thing. And she's really a story over the course of the year. We didn't make her into a better teacher. She was already teacher of the year. I mean, she's an amazing teacher, but I definitely think she became a more playful and more joyful teacher. Partly just she herself was more playful, and it became really fun to be in her classroom. But also, at the end of the year when we did our professional development reflection, she said, I really believe that the most important thing that children have to do is play to learn math. And it was such a 180 from May the previous year. And so I do think it's a very small group of teachers we're working with right now, but we do have a lot of evidence that, well, we have 6 people's evidence that, watching children's play, it matters for teachers. And I think to Nathaniel's point, it's not, like, play is not a panacea, and kids do terrible things to each other. I mean, a lot but it does introduce opportunities for release, I think, that aren't existing in all the other classroom structures. Other questions? There's a hand in the back. Okay, let's see if we can do it. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah. Right, black shirt. Yeah, right in the back. Yeah, so yeah. So just to restate the question to make sure everyone heard. So one question is about, like, can this be, like, replicated? How do you think about doing these same kinds of activities in other classrooms and other spaces? And then the second question is, I think, like, well, what's the role of culture, right? Because what may feel really collaborative and productive in one space might feel really problematic in another space. We have a little ice chorus behind us. One thing I'll say briefly, and then I'll turn it over to the harder question. I'll turn to the panelists. In terms of the ways we're thinking about replicating this work, we're actually working in a school right now that has a lot of things going for it and a lot of things working against it. The number one thing that the school has going for it is the administrators said to us, we believe in you. And we're going to release you from the obligations of fulfilling this curriculum, and we're going to let you work with our teachers and have a lot of rope, which anyone who's worked with schools for a while knows, like, that's a pretty rare thing to have happen. So it's an incredibly privileged space for us in that sense. In the other sense, the school has a lot of challenges. It has a lot of kids who are coming in undiagnosed who need extra assistance in the classroom. They've got pretty big class sizes. They have the same kind of teacher turnover issues that a lot of other schools have. So in fact, this year, our new teaching cohort, 12 of the teachers, 4 of them are brand new novice teachers, and only 2 of our teachers actually return to kindergarten. So that's kind of actually very typical in public schools. And so in that sense, we're actually not looking at a space that's like, you know, wow, all of our teachers are 20-year veteran teachers who are amazing teachers, right? We're really working in spaces that I think are pretty typical across American public schools, and I would argue Tennessee is especially grim, actually. So I think that gives us hope to think about, well, why do things work in these spaces? What kind of modifications might we need to make to work elsewhere? But the question of culture, I think, is a really important one, so I want to turn that over to everyone to think about, to just address, and then we'll turn it over. Nobody wants to talk about this.
Okay, so inside joke, we were like, okay, so what was the question? Okay, we want to make sure we answer the question. Okay, so we were all debating to make sure we understood your second question. And so I'm not clear, so I don't want to respond because I want to be clear. So could you just ask that second question? You were mentioning violence. Because we were doing the same thing over here. Yes, okay.
Yeah, I think I understand the question now. So I would say first, like, we're not trying to put together some like national curriculum on play and like send out like, here, you should do these in all these spaces, right? I don't know a way to do this work that isn't about getting the people in a community together to say, how can we create more playful spaces for the kids in our community? So that's one part. And then the other part is, of course, in many public schools, there are children from many different cultures coming together to do these things. And so there are going to be conflicts in that space. But I would say one of the really beautiful things about play is that's an opportunity to negotiate that, because what we know in a really adult directed, direct instruction space is it is a like white supremacist middle class culture monolingual thing that's happening, and so maybe we don't get this conflict because no one actually gets to like show who they are or what their family is like. And yes, it does come up in play, but like that's the good part, right? That like we want kids coming together and negotiating that with each other, and that is actually the most important work of early childhood educators. It's not like getting them, I'm sorry to tell you this here, to recognize base 10.
I just wanted to build on your question about play in some places, how it's different. I have run into this idea that teachers fear play or the use of tools because of just where they are. So, for example, I was with an early childhood project, and we were thinking about games to play to work with students as we were trying to engage in mathematics. And so there were different games that we wanted to play. For example, we wanted to use cards in different ways to create games. We wanted to use dice. But when we presented that to the teachers in the school district, in this urban district, we were told no because they were concerned that children were going to be gambling. No, it's a serious thing. So if you can think about all of the mathematical games that we can think about kids can enjoy and play in that use cards and dice are no longer accessible because this fear that these black and brown children are going to be gambling in schools. And so that's also a thing to think about, is how can we strip away these stereotypes, the ways, these ideologies that we think about communities of colors, the way that they engage, so that kids can actually learn and play games. Like I'm sorry, time. Okay. I was like, I'm sorry. Anyhow, so I just think that's also something that's happening, like actually in schools that we are wrestling with, and kids can't play.
All right. So thank you all for your comments, and thank you so much to our panelists. We'll turn this back over to Tran.